Hello, hello. How do I sound? How do I sound? Yeah, go ahead. Hey guys. Thank you, Paloma, for subscribing. Babe92, thank you for subscribing. Hi, Unity. Am I saying that right? I know you've been in these before, so good to see you. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Martha. Okay, you said it sounds clear. Okay, good. I said it sounds clear. Hello. Are we good? Are we good? All right. Okay, okay. Hello. Okay, you guys. So today it's going to be a little different. If you've been in my last few streams, you know we've been incorporating these different screens. And normally, Dosi, my husband, sits over there and does them. Today, I'm going to be trying to run it. So we're going to see how that works. So, you know, bear with me as I try to figure this out because I'm not really a tech person. Okay. Hi, Colleen. Hello, hello. It's so good seeing some of you. Some of you guys I've been seeing your notes and thoughts in group on Goodreads. So it's cool to see you in this space as well. All right, so let's get started. We are talking today about A Little Life. This book is definitely one of the hardest reads I've ever had. I'm curious to know about everyone's scores. We won't do a poll, but you guys can just write in 1 through 5. I really don't like doing the polls because I can't get all 5 options on there. So please put in the chat what your score is 1 through 5. Okay, and also if any of you started the book and you didn't finish it, that's fine. I want to know about that too. I can understand why people might have needed to take a break. I want to go ahead and let you guys know that this is the universal trigger warning, and I'll have to probably say it a few more times throughout the live because we will be talking about some very heavy topics. This book has a lot of topics that could be triggering, and we will be talking about them, not in depth necessarily, but we will be talking about them. Okay, so BG gave it a 2 out of 5. I'd love to know, BG, what your reason is for your rating. I feel like this is one of those books where it's like either you're going to be 5-star or like 1 or 2-star. It's just not, I just don't think it's a book that you normally fall in the middle, but I could be wrong about that. Okay, 3 out of 5, Unity says, haven't finished yet. How far are you, Unity? Because I'm really worried about spoilers too. If I have an idea of where you are, maybe I can kind of give you a heads up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and reveal my rating. I just finished last night. I'll be honest, I did not think I was going to finish this in time because, you know, we do a book every other month in this book club. And so I do that so that everybody has time to not only read the book of the month, but also whatever other things you're trying to get to. I know that people get overwhelmed having a new book every month, and I was even getting a little overwhelmed because I was wanting to get to some other things. And I finished yesterday, and I was so, at the end of reading the book, I was not sure about how I wanted to rate it because I was like, how do you rate a book that shows so much pain? It's, you know, it's like, I can't say it was a pleasurable read. Yeah, I read the trigger warnings, knew it wasn't for you. Totally respect that, Debs. I always knew this was going to be a tough read, which is why I put it off for years. before I read it, because I was just like, I need to make sure I'm in a good headspace, because I heard everybody says this book will destroy you. This is one of those books where people are like, this book will destroy you. And so for me, once I finished it yesterday and I sat on it, I actually ended up giving it 5 stars. Oh, just the last chapter. Okay. I ended up giving it 5 stars, and that's because I felt like the writing was so beautiful, and I'm a huge fan of good character development, and I really felt like this book, every single character was nuanced. I loved that you didn't have anybody who was just the hero, no one who was just the victim, and a lot of storytelling is like that. I thought this book was done in a realistic way in terms of showing, we don't always get that story that we're wanting to see. Everything isn't, happily ever after. And so I had to give it 5 stars, but it was a very difficult decision, because I'm like, what does that 5 stars mean? Does that mean I would want to read this again? Never. I would never, never, never want to read it again. But while I was reading it, the experience of reading it, I was completely invested. I was rooting for the characters. I was frustrated with the characters. And for me, that really led it to having a higher rating. BG said, I had to give it 2 stars because according to Goodreads rating system, I thought it was just okay. It was so hard for me to read, the toughest book that I've read. Absolutely can see that. Very, very tough. Another book that before this book was the toughest book that I've read. I'm curious if any of you have read the book Fast I think it's by Millie Belazaire. That book also has SA triggers, and it is the first, I didn't even think I was gonna make it through the first 5%. Are you changing the lighting? Oh, okay. I was like, is that just my eyes? Is that the camera? But yeah, so it was that book, I feel like, was another book I gave 5 stars, but the first 5% was really hard to get through. But that book I absolutely loved because it's really a romance. This book, I'm curious, would you all qualify this book as a romance for those who have read it? Would you consider this to be a romance? BG said, I thought it focused on the negative things for way too long. I'm a big baby, but I'm proud of myself for reading it. I'm proud of you too. You are not a big baby if you made it through this book. Honestly, if you didn't make it through this book, you're also not a big baby, because anybody who was able to look at it, recognize it was not for them, complete respect for that. It was beautifully written, but Lord, never again, right? And this is the kind of book I would never even recommend to somebody after reading it. And I just knew that this was a book that I wanted to read with the book club, just people who are focused on mental health. And this is probably the most challenging book we've ever read in this book in this club in terms of trauma. So it was a very, very intense read. Let's go to the agenda for today. Today, just, we clearly already got started with it, but our book ratings. Now I want to also show you guys some of the Goodreads highlights. We had some good conversations going this month with the book of the month, and I want to share with you guys what people have been saying. I'll also, of course, go through some quotes that really resonated with me. For those of you who didn't read this book was 800 pages, over 30 hours if you were doing the audiobook. It's a chunker. So I have so many highlights, and you guys know I already always struggle with getting through all of my highlights. But I definitely am going to go through. And I didn't put this on the agenda, but even throughout this, if you all have questions for me, if you have questions that you want me to answer about topics in this book or about this book in general, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'm always happy to kind of use these lives as more of a back and forth than when I do the filmed videos. That's the purpose of these. So please feel free to ask me questions if you want. Okay. So, and then we'll also talk about the poll for the next book. After this book, I don't know about you all, but I'm actually missing like a nice like self-help. So I was we did this as a palate cleanser for everybody who was kind of like needing a break from the self-help books. But after this, I'm kind of wanting to get into like a little bit more of the self-development work. Okay. So let's look at some of the things that people are saying in the Goodreads group. If you're not in the Goodreads group, and Dosi did put a link there. I think I'm supposed to go to live scenes, right? Okay. All right. So this is for any of you who are not on our in our Goodreads group. This is the book club on Goodreads. Now, you don't have to be on here. You can just save the date for our next book club meeting. It's usually going to be the last Tuesday every other month. This one obviously will do a little differently because of the holidays. But if you just show up to these lives, you're part of the book club. I have people asking all the time, like, oh no, where do I sign up? You can either come on Goodreads or you can just join here. So you can see here, just giving you guys a little bit of a tour here on Goodreads. If you ever miss one of the videos from a book club live, you can always find this here. Then you can always, if you're ever curious, like, what are we reading this month? I'll get that question a lot of times. I always have that here. And if you are part of the book club, I usually try to set the book we're reading, a week or two in advance if I can, so that you'll get an email telling you what book we're reading next. And so here we have like all of our discussion boards and a little life. You can see all of the different chapters. You all are free to create your own folders here. If you have other things you want to talk about, that is fine as well. Okay, so we're going to jump into what people's thoughts were on the book. Again, we're hopping into spoilers and also some trigger warnings, but I won't be talking too much about I won't be talking in depth about some of the things that we need the trigger warnings about, but I will be using the language and talking about the story a little bit. But I will try to do it with care. Okay, so what I ended up doing, this book, for anybody who didn't read the book, it is such a thick book, and every part, you're learning things, there's mysteries, there's a lot that comes with reading it. So I just found myself kind of needing a little personal journal while I was reading it. I was kind of using the Goodreads group as that. So every time I finished a part, which the chapters were so long, the chapters were so long, 800-page book, you can imagine. But after I was done with the part, sometimes I would come in and just share my thoughts. So this is from part 1. These were my thoughts, and feel free to chime in if you weren't able to get your notes in there. You can see Yenity in here, who's also in the live. So we'll be sharing a little bit about Yenity's response. So I'll read here. I said, okay, so here are my thoughts. Whoa, these chapters are long. Then I talked about enjoying a character-driven novel. For me in the book, throughout the entirety of the book, the character that frustrated me the most, that I found the least relatable, was JB. As I said, all of the characters had some struggles and stressors, but JB for me was the one that I had like the most issues with. He, did so many things to his friends. I personally was like, why are they still friends with him? Because he just violated them so many times in terms of what he would say and what he would do. And he always was blaming other people for where he was in life. And I know a lot of it had to do with his family, but he was somebody who really frustrated me. The person I liked the most from the beginning is Willem. And then there was some heavy foreshadowing, and it started making me nervous about Jude is our main character. But I'm curious, how long did it take you to realize that? Because for me, I was reading through that first part, and they were showing each of the friends' perspectives on their lives and the goals they had. We start with them like in college. And so I really felt like it was interesting to not even be clear on who was the lead of the book. I loved Willem too, Yenity. And so it's one of those things where I could definitely I could definitely see why people were confused about who the lead character was. I know I was. And I personally thought after I finished part one that Willem was the lead of the story, but Jude, I believe, was the lead. I mean, Jude definitely was the lead of the story. When you really look at it by the end, all of the characters are revolved around Jude. And so the interesting here too is about Willem's relationship with his parents, because his parents wanted children so badly. They had 4 children. Willem was their youngest. Their first 2 passed away. Their third had cerebral palsy and a severely. I have some clients that have cerebral palsy, and it's not as severe, but Willem's brother Hemming was not able to speak, talk, and I thought it was so interesting how the author wrote the story about, like, Willem was born when Hemming was 8 years old, and then she talks about how Willem went on to crawl, to walk, to run, basically outpacing Hemming's development, and Hemming was 8 years older than him, and so that was just so interesting. And so I was so fascinated by how Willem's parents wanted children so badly, yet they were so, as Willem describes them, like emotionally disconnected. He even talks about learning how to take like a monotone voice with them in a similar way that they used with him. So that was very interesting. And I was thinking, just the trauma of having 3 deceased children, that they may have just experienced too much grief to connect. Maybe they were constantly in fear of losing their children, and they just learned not to emotionally bond with them. Curious what your thoughts are on that. Let me look what we have saying in the chat. BG, when the book started mentioning Jude's pain, that is when I realized he was on the cover and that he was the main character. And so that's the other thing. I wasn't even sure who was on the cover. Like for a while, I was like, is this Willem on the cover? And the reason why is because they described Jude as racially ambiguous. And to me, the person on the cover looked white. And I'm curious for you how he looks to you. But to me, he looked white. And they said that his character is racially ambiguous, where everybody was confused about his background. And even he was confused. Maisie said, sometimes it was difficult to distinguish between narrators, but I think it fit the book's overall style. Sorry, guys. I just had dinner right before this. But, okay, so one thing that really helped me get through this book, I ended up reading this book, a majority of it, in one weekend, this past weekend. Don't know how, because we had a lot of stuff going on, but I was able to get through it. One thing that really helped me was that in addition to reading the actual book, which for me, you guys know is digital. I don't like hard covers, or I don't like reading physical books. Well, I also did it in tandem with the audiobook, which really helped because the audio narrator was actually really good in that I could almost tell whose perspective he was telling it from. Hey, what's going on?
Oh, it's going to cat in you.
Oh no, because I'm still reading through this. It's okay. So I felt like that narrator did a great job of talking about, of using different voices, where it did help me. Like some of his voices were very, very distinctive. And so that did help me know. But I imagine if I was reading it without the audiobook, I probably will also be confused about which narrators were speaking. And I think that actually would have probably taken my score down as well. Gloria says, my boyfriend's take is that the main character is the one who ended the story. Oh, Harold. Oh, I love that idea, but I don't know about that, because even Harold is writing to Willem. So, that's interesting, because we don't learn anything about Harold's background other than him losing his son. That is so interesting. Hey, sandwich artist Tony, I know the book was so long. I know, and I was thinking, hey, I got 2 months, I'll get through this, and then I ended up having to finish it in a weekend because I procrastinated. I probably got like 20% through, like at the beginning of October, but then I got very busy Some of you may know I did a TED talk recently, so I was very focused on that. And so by the time all of that was over, I'm like, oh my gosh, book club's on Tuesday. And so I got through probably the other 80% this past weekend. Okay, so Unity says she agrees with Maisie. Remind me what Maisie said. Yeah, it was difficult to distinguish, definitely. So did you guys use the audiobook or did you just read? Curious about that. Okay, so now I'm going to share what Unity wrote. She said, I don't think I read a character-driven novel in the past, so this is new to me. Very curious, Unity, about your experience, since you're in here, your experience with that, because I think character-driven novels are definitely not for everyone because there's no plot. And they're mostly like just slice of life kind of books. Sally Rooney writes a lot of just character driven, no plot sort of books. I love her writing as well. And I think that also probably boosted my rating because I do just in general just enjoy those kind of books. JB is my least favorite character. Culture-wise, I can relate to JB. JB is considered the man of the house by his grandmother and mother. His mother cleans and cooks his favorite food. I have an older brother who is seen as the man of the house by my mom. Yeah, I see that culturally a lot as well. I love how the author told the story of all the main characters except for Jude's in part one. It left me in suspense and motivated me to continue reading, listening to find out more about Jude's past. Definitely. So the way, it was brilliant the way that she told the story because I really wasn't sure who the lead was. And come to find out it was Jude, the one person whose story we didn't learn. So if I was using context clues, I probably should have been like, oh, the person with all the mystery and suspense is the person who is the lead. So I thought that was brilliant writing. Okay, Colleen says, and hi, Colleen is in here. I read the book. It took me 2 weeks. I'm surprised I actually finished, but it was an enthralling story. It really was. I'm shocked I finished as well. BG said that she read the paperback. Oh, watching from Australia. Hi, is it Choki? Nice to have you here. Okay, and then Sandwich Artist Tony did the audiobook. And then Gloria, physical book. It was cathartic to toss the book in the end while crying. You know, you always see like the book talkers or booktubers doing that, throwing the book. Yeah, this is one of those books where I could definitely see myself doing that if I had a physical. I'm not throwing my Kindle. Okay, so Colleen said, and is it Colleen or Colleen? I hope I'm saying it right. I hope it's Colleen. Or if it's Colleen, let me know. It's been years since I've read a novel, so this has been a pleasant reintroduction. Wow, years since reading a novel in general. So do you typically do self-help or self-improvement? The author's fluid storytelling makes it an easy read. JB is highly opinionated and judgmental, but on the other hand, also seems to be the life of the party. Willem and Hemming's bond is touching. I could tell a lot about Willem's character, sweet, caring, compassionate by this alone. However, I was annoyed with him for not wanting to ask Jude the hard questions after the New Year's Eve incident. The suspense and wanting to know more about Jude kept me engaged. I agree with everything. And the New Year's Eve incident, for those who didn't read the book, is a trigger warning. Was it the cutting? Oh yeah, that's where he accidentally cut too much. So Jude self-harms regularly, and we'll talk more about his rationale behind it. I thought that was very accurately articulated based on the conversations I have with my clients. I was just talking with one of my clients about cutting today. And because of this book, I was able to say something to them where I could see for them, like it registered that I understood better why, their reason why. And it was kind of thanks to this book. So that's why I read these kinds of books. You know, I think a lot of times we do put a huge emphasis on reading self-improvement books, especially as therapists, or books about your practice, how to maintain your practice. And I obviously do that as well. But I think sometimes you get the most benefit when you're reading stories from the first person point of view, especially for someone who's been through it. So I'm actually curious. I want to watch some interviews with the author to see what inspired her to write this book, because she's writing about characters like completely outside of her demographic. So I was wondering where she was pulling from for the storytelling aspect, because it did feel like a person who was very intimately close with this narrative. But I just, was curious about her relationship to it. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what Colleen proposed at the end, which is frustration about Willem not asking Jude the hard questions after the New Year's Eve incident. So let me ask you all, have you ever been in a position where someone you love or knew was doing like some form of self-harm, whether that's addiction, whether that, even a relationship that's harmful, abusive, in this case, self-harm, something where you want to help them, but they are resistant to talking about it? Maybe they just straight up lie to you. Have you all ever been in that position? As a therapist, I'm in that position a lot. My clients are probably sharing more with me than they would with their average person that they're engaging with. Like I just talked about, having a client that I was talking with cutting about today. However, it is a fine line between getting a person help and attempting to help someone and losing their trust in the process, which I've seen many times. And it's a very, very difficult line to walk, because I'll have some clients, for example, who will just be honest with me and say they've been thinking more about self-harm. They've been thinking more trigger warning about killing themselves. And my gut reaction is like, when I first started out, it's panic. Like, oh my gosh, what if I don't see them by the next session? As you work in this field a little bit longer, you start develop a bit of callousness around it, and you don't panic every time you hear that. You can't, or you wouldn't be able to do your job. But you always have to constantly ask yourself and use clinical judgment. Is this the time that I call and have them hospitalized? Or is this the time that I trust them to use their safety plan that we worked on together? They're being honest with me. You have to ask about intention. Now, if they're saying straight up, on Tuesday at this time, I'm going to do this, okay, that's suicidal intent. But if they're saying, I've been imagining what things would look like if I were gone, or if they're saying, things would just be easier if I weren't here, that's what we call suicidal ideation. So when you're dealing with suicidal ideation, sometimes it's very difficult to make that judgment call of, when do I take it further? When do I need to make sure I'm providing more support to them? And so I'm curious for you all, is this something that you've ever had to deal with a friend or family member? Because I feel like if you haven't had that experience, this book is also a little bit harder to understand or take when you're looking at his friends and family members, what feels like doing nothing and not realizing like they don't know what to do, and not knowing what it feels like to be so helpless in a position like that. I've been in that position many times. So I could understand Willem's hesitance to move forward, because he's trying to figure out because Harold said it, Willem said it. They know if they push too far, Jude would just cut them out. Jude confirmed that. He would just cut them out of his life if they push too much. So how do you stay around to be able to continue to help? Very, very curious about your thoughts on that. Okay, so let's move on to, I'm not going to even read my highlights, because a lot of the highlights that they shared in the group are the same highlights that I had. So that'll be great. We can just look at that. So we're going to move on to part 2. Okay, so these are my thoughts. Now, I started out with like a lot of thoughts, and as we move through the parts, you'll see like I'll just be like talking about one or two things. I say, here we finally learn about Jude's backstory. It was emotionally taxing to process all that he went through in his childhood. I became nervous on Harold's chapter that he was going to reveal an inappropriate attraction to Jude. I'm so relieved that wasn't the case. So for anyone who didn't read it or needs a refresher, Jude actually experienced a lot of trauma, especially sexual trauma, as a child, even all the way up until adulthood. And so, the fear of a grown man taking an interest in him was it was, the story was told in a way where I had that fear as well. That to me is a symbol of the great writing, that I was also nervous. I was also distrusting of Harold, just like our main character. So that's how you know it's good writing, when you are feeling the same things as these characters. I didn't. OMG, the adoption. This was one of the most beautiful parts of the story. So, just giving you guys a little background for anybody who didn't read this book. Jude actually grew up in a monastery because he was abandoned as a baby. And he was around like 4 or 5 priests who abused him, sexually abused him, physically abused him. There's a story about someone burning him with a match, or was it a cigarette? I think it was a match. And he has this terrible scar on the back of his hand. So he experienced so much trauma. And because he didn't have parents, he was always looking for that adult that would take care of him. One of the brothers at the monastery convinced him to run away with him when I think he was 7 or 8 years old. And then he ends up basically pimping him out, and then telling him that when he turns 16, they're going to get married. And so just completely inappropriate. And there was a time where Jude, when once that guy was found, Jude was sent to a foster home. Well, first a group home, where he was also abused at the group home. And this was my other problem with the book. I'm curious, do you all think that the level of trauma depicted in this book is realistic? Obviously, it's not normal. Obviously, it's not common. But is it realistic? After a certain point, I started feeling like it was not realistic. As a person who works with people who have severe trauma, I've never seen a person not, go from situation to situation, and the same thing is happening over and over and over again. Like, you're basically encountering the same people over and over again. And I might be wrong about that. So I was curious if it felt realistic to you guys. But my favorite part of this section, and probably the whole book, is that I feel like that adoption, when Harold and Julia adopted Jude at 30. And some of you might say why, but they first of all had an amazing relationship with him. And then also they wanted to have someone to pass their things down. Harold had a child before, and that child passed away at, I want to say maybe 10, but it could have been even earlier than that. And so it was so heartwarming, that adoption, but it was just interesting how Jude was so worried about ruining it that he was cutting more, and he was in a very, very dangerous place just out of fear that they were going to change their minds, because Jude had one experience where he was about to be adopted, or thought he was, and the people just went cold on him. They never responded to him. They never followed up, and he wasn't adopted, so he was just really afraid about people changing their mind. Okay, BG said, no, it was not realistic to me. It felt overdone. Yeah, I think that is one of my main complaints about the book, is that it just feels like, I don't know, that's why I want to understand more about why she wrote this book. What inspired you? Like, did you know someone who actually experienced these things? Then if you're just telling somebody's story, I can't fault you for that. But if this is something you came up with, why did you want to make it so difficult for your reader to, experience this story? Gloria said, I've heard similar stories, not common, but it happened. And I think this book depicts a more common scenario of sex trafficking and how it affects its victims. Yeah, Gloria. And I almost kind of wish that would have just been the focus. Like, maybe if we only saw the sex trafficking portion, but to see, you start out in the monastery, sexual abuse. Then you go to the group home, sexual abuse. Then you no, you go start at the Montessori, then you are stuck with this one brother, sexual abuse and sex trafficking. Then you go to a group home, sexual abuse. Then you escape the group home, and the one person who finds you is this evil person who's also looking to abuse you and hurt you. And it's just like, then even the first relationship that Jude gets in as an adult, once again, abuse, sexual abuse. And so I do know, of course, that a lot of times we attract what we know, but some of these things, it was not him attracting it. They were just situations he was put in. And I'm like, at what point do we, even if this is what happened to somebody, I feel like some editing was necessary here because it just became just too much, in my opinion. I just think at some point it affects the story and the plausibility of the story. Okay, let's read some of these comments. Okay. Maisie says, it was hard for me to read because I have a degree in social work and have met so many wonderful people in the field. Yeah, that I can totally see that. However, I know the system isn't perfect and many people suffer at the hands of the people who are supposed to help them. Very true. I know it happens, definitely know it happens in all of these individual situations, but what is the likelihood that one person would experience it at every level and not a single person to actually help save, rescue them? I mean, I'm sure it has happened. I know it has happened, but I just want to know more about why the author chose this story and how the story was told. Ali said, I know from my life experience, when I was still vulnerable and naive, I was always just going from abusive situation to abusive situation until I made a change for myself, which I could totally see that if Jude was making these decisions, right? But these decisions are being made for him. So he goes from, first he's abandoned, he's in the monastery, okay. And even the fact that it wasn't just one person abusing him, but like every single priest was abusing him there. Then he, one of those brothers takes him and starts sex trafficking him. Then, it's like every time, it's like there was nobody around to save you from this situation. Like he wasn't attracted to these situations. He was put in these situations. So if he was like an adult or a decision-making person, I could totally see that happening over and over again. I see it in my work every day. But that's the part that felt like I was losing the plausibility. The Caleb part made sense. When he was dating Caleb, that made sense. That's what you're used to. But at this, I just felt like a lot of it was just feeling like maybe over the top or unrealistic. Rami said, some people said the book was trauma. Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Ali said, it helped to go to therapy and learn healthy coping mechanisms and also be able to identify who did not have my best interest at heart. And that is the thing that I'm curious. What are your thoughts on the conversation around therapy when it came to Jude? Because a lot of what we were talking about was essentially Jude being very resistant to therapy, which I think is realistic. But I'm curious, why was he so resistant to therapy? I know that he didn't like to talk about his story, but do you think that if he would have gotten into therapy earlier, that it would have actually helped, or no? I'm curious. They never really said once he started going to therapy how long he was in therapy. Even certain things like sleep, being able to get sleep with the help of maybe some sleep aids. But then again, if you give a person with suicidal ideation sleep aids, that's also a concern. So, it seemed very, very difficult. Okay. Shantane said, I saw a lot of videos on TikTok of people saying this was a very hard read and they wish they never read it. Would you recommend anyone read this book? Like I said, I would never recommend people read this book. Even when I announced it, that we were reading it, I'm like, please read at your own pace. Please read the trigger warnings. I wouldn't ever recommend this book to somebody, but I can say I don't regret reading it. But also in my line of work, I think I have a kind of higher tolerance for hearing and reading about trauma because it's a part of my, daily experience. I wouldn't recommend someone read it unless you are actually looking, some people are actually looking for a book where they say, this book ripped me open, this book really permeated through me, or whatever, where I felt seen. If you're looking for that experience, it could be a good choice for you. But I think, if you go throughout your entire life never reading this book, you'll be okay. Okay, so let's keep going down on Goodreads. Okay, Jude's self-harm is written in a way that I find a painfully accurate portrayal of the inner monologue that can accompany abuse survivors. I'm still really worried about Jude's future, and I hope that nothing else devastating happens with him. His friendship with both Willem and Andy warmed my heart. I'm an absolute sucker for the found family trope. So I loved Andy was like the tough love friend, and Willem was like the gentle friend, and he definitely needed that balance. Jazzbella says, yes, I was so worried about Harold's chapter at the beginning, but I'm so happy it ended up being such a happy moment for everybody. I cried as well. I am still worried about Jude. I don't want him to self-sabotage and it lead to something heartbreaking. I was mad with JB about the painting, even though I expected it from him, but I'm glad they sorted it out, and I'm ready to see what happens next. In reference to that, basically their friend JB, who I said I have a lot of issues with, he was doing a painting, a series of paintings about his friends. He promised Jude that he would give Jude, the option to veto any paintings he had of him, because Jude's very sensitive about people looking at him. But when it came time, he just totally did not honor that promise. Okay, so here are some quotes. Shout out to Monica. She came today and she responded to like everything in here. So I don't know if you're in here, Monica. But I want to read some of what she said, because she really had some great thoughts that I think resonated with a lot of people. Jude of Harold, could you have a real relationship if some part of you was always expecting betrayal? I think that is, and Monica makes asks a lot of questions about what quotes are the main thesis of the book. I think this is one of the main theses of the book, which is Jude, because of all the trauma he experienced in his younger life, he could never, ever fully trust someone. He could never, ever fully trust himself. He was constantly concerned. And honestly, he was in such a delicate state emotionally, physically, that he was right not to trust people a lot of times. I'm going to have to skip a little bit ahead. Obviously this one is not going to be just an hour, but how did you all feel about when Willem and Jude started dating? I really want to know about your thoughts for any of you who are there. Oh, hi, Monica. Okay, great. I'll be sharing some of your thoughts here. I'm so glad you're here. When Willem and Jude started dating, I was very, very worried about what their dynamic would be like, because Jude has such a complex relationship with intimacy. He is finally starting to open up to Willem about some of his trauma of the past. And then now we're complicating it with a romantic relationship. I was really, really worried about that. I was very hesitant. Of course, as I was reading their story in the back of my mind, when they were, just friends for all these years, I'm thinking, I think they were friends for 30 years before they ever started dating. And I was thinking, man, how great would it be if they were able to fall in love with each other. But then at the same time, I was like, no, I don't want that to happen. That's too messy. And so even with that relationship, I feel like Willem admits to certain things. And this is what I liked about this book, is that no one is perfect. Willem admits to knowing that Jude was cutting himself for a long time before they even had that conversation. He doesn't admit it out loud. He admits it in his inner monologue when we're reading the book. He also admits that he knew that Jude was uncomfortable with them having sex, and he just allowed himself to continue believing that Jude actually was comfortable with them having sex. And so in some ways, Willem was absolutely taking advantage of Jude, Because if you know that this is something that he just cannot do comfortably, and you're still wanting that or requiring that of him, then it made sense why Jude would not feel comfortable trusting anyone. Ultimately, they do navigate that by removing sex from their relationship. But I think, during those months of Willem knowing, he even says he knows that Jude cutting more had to do with their sex life. As a friend, as a partner, to delude yourself into like making that okay, like nobody's trustworthy, in my opinion. I'm very curious about your thoughts on that. Um, mm-mm-mm. I was happy for them, but also worried. BG says the issues they ended up having with intimacy were exactly what I expected. Yeah. And I really felt Jude like always asking, maybe it's the wrong person, maybe it's the wrong situation, like always hoping that sex would be a more positive experience for him. And really just realizing that not having sex was the happiest he could be. Oh my gosh, the one quote that really got me is when he said, one of the best parts about adulthood is not having to have sex. And I just thought that was just, and that's before we really knew his background. And that quote just really like, I was like, wow, imagine getting into adulthood and looking at that as the break from sex. Okay. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, another quote from Monica. I love Harold's response to Jude. I might say that this whole incident is a metaphor for life in general. Things get broken and sometimes they get repaired. And in most cases, you realize that no matter what gets damaged, life rearranges itself to compensate for your loss, sometimes wonderfully. And I think that the thing about this is like it really shows, like Monica is even talking about in her next paragraph, the difference between Harold and Jude is that Jude views things that are broken as always broken, and Harold looks at things that are broken as opportunities for something to be fixed. Harold also experienced a significant trauma with the loss of his son, but Harold used that as, it opened his heart. His marriage fell apart, but he opened his heart again for another love. He opened his heart again for another son. And so he has this belief that things can get better. And I think that really was the detriment of his relationship with Jude, because in the end, and this is going to be like the biggest spoiler for anybody who hasn't finished it. So if you don't want to hear this, then definitely click off. But when Jude does ultimately end up ending his life, Harold is so affected by that, because I think Harold always thought that there was this possibility that they would be able to fix him. And I think that Jude was really, really on the mend after his amputation, because something we haven't even talked about yet is the portrayal of chronic disability in this book. And a quote that we'll get to is where they talk about trying to explain the logic of the sick to the healthy. And, like Jude, there was a point where the elevator wasn't working in his apartment. Jude is in his wheelchair and he decides to try to walk up 110 stairs with his wheelchair, having to stop and being in chronic pain. And everybody's like, why don't you call this person? Why don't you call that person? And, it already took a lot, because before he even started doing that, he called Willem several times. He was only comfortable telling Willem about what was going on. And that already took a lot out of him. And so, that desire to be independent and capable. And he even said that it took him a long time to use the word handicap or disabled, even while he's, going around in a wheelchair. So this book shows so many different, I think, important untold stories, which is why I had to still give it 5 stars. Even with a lot of my frustrations with the story itself, I still think the way it was told in a way that I think will help me understand walks of life that I may not have understood at all before. Mm. Okay, I'm gonna move on because you have such heat in here, Monica. You have such great quotes. I'm gonna move on to our next section because we are already low on time. No. Okay. So part 3. This is where you start seeing my notes getting shorter and shorter because I would be just so overwhelmed just processing my own thoughts that I couldn't even like formulate them. I even skipped entire parts. I said, I love reading about all their success. It's hard for me to have empathy for JB, especially after how he treated Jude. JB ends up becoming addicted to meth. And one of the ways that he lashes out is by imitating Jude and him having a cripple's walk or whatever that he learned from one of his fellow addict friends. You know, he was kind of imitating his friend's imitation of Jude. And that was just like that. I mean, I already didn't like JB, but after that, I never, ever, ever forgave him for that. Like, I never looked at it later and was like, oh, he was struggling his addiction. I just never, some lines you just don't cross. And Willem was kind of on the same page of like, I really just can't get over this. Even if Jude did, like, I can't forgive you for that. And we really never did get more about Malcolm after that. Colleen says, I agree it's hard to feel bad for JB. I dislike his tactless honesty, amongst other things. He's clearly an externalizer, curious whether getting knocked out by William shifts his perspective later on. Yeah, after he did that, William literally knocked him out. I loved that moment because he made me so mad. But you see how like these characters feel so alive, so real. Like I can be so angry. Those things are the reasons why I had to give this book a 5-star rating. It was interesting to see how each of them are struggling with their own inner battles and insecurities about career decisions and changing friendship dynamics. It's very relatable. Colleen's favorite quote from this part is, it was impossible to explain the healthy of the logic to the sick, which we just talked about. And Monica also agreed with that quote. And then here's another quote from Monica. Not because I don't trust you, but because I can't bear to have you see me as I really am. Oh, that's so true. And it's really hard to explain that because it does still come across as you don't trust the person to be able to deal with all that you are. And he was right for that. Because even as he did start opening up more to Willem, it was hard for Willem to process that. People think they want to hear your story. People think they want to know everything about you. But a lot of times people just don't have the language to support you. They don't have the experience to understand what you've been through. And sometimes they want to support more than they actually can. And so that's why I was really always hoping that Jude would have found a good therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist to support him and get some support from someone who the stakes weren't so high like they were with the people that loved him in his life that he was so afraid of abandoning him. Okay, let's move on to the next section. See, I skipped part 4. This is the part where everything is going fine. Willem and Jude are together finally. And then Willem dies. You guys, this was the first time that I really, really, really boohoo cried. I was not ready for that. Like when I read that, they just say he got in an accident, then you really don't find out for sure that he died until the next part. That was the part that broke me. I'm like, of all the trauma that Jude experienced, it felt like this was the light at the end of his tunnel, just to be taken away like that. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying. BG said, I had a situation similar with what happened with Jude and JB. And after that group of 4 friends, because it was too unforgivable. Interesting. So was it something that happened to you, BG, or happened to another person in that group? But like the situation in the book, there were warning signs before that incident. Yeah, I really feel like JB is just somebody that Jude did not need in his life. Like, I want to know for you all, what value do you think JB added to their life after college? Everybody has that fun friend in college. It's a little crazy. Things are kept interesting. But what value do you think JB added after college? Monica says, "Oh yeah, I think Willem actually says at one point, like, please go to a therapist because I can't help you." Yeah, do you remember when Jude says to Andy, he's like, "I'm just gonna open up to Willem," and Willem's like, he's like, Willem is not a mental health professional. He's an actor. And Willem, even later on, in his chapters, you hear him replaying that conversation with Andy. Like, and he's like, yes, I agree. I can't really help you with this. But at the same time, again, I'm going to ask you all, have you ever been in a position where you have a person you love who's refusing help, the help you think they should have? And so you're kind of stuck figuring it out with what they'll give you. And I feel like that was the position that Willem was in. Like, he had to just figure it out. He had to figure out whatever Jude would be willing to do. And if he's thinking Jude needs to talk to somebody, the only person he's willing to talk to is me. I got to be that guy. I feel like it was a difficult place for him to be in. Okay, so Monica shared her thoughts both from part 4 and part 5 because I skipped part 4 in my thing. Okay, great quote. Great quote to pull out, Monica. So in part 4, just to give a little background, Jude had a social worker named Anna, who was probably the first person to actually give him some genuine help. She paid for his college applications and she was trying to help him learn how to open up to people, but she ended up getting sick and died, of course. It's like nothing can ever just go good for him. And this is a quote from that. His silence had begun as something protective, but over the years, it has transformed into something near oppressive, something that manages him rather than the other way around. Now he cannot find a way out of it, even when he wants to. And that is so true, Monica. Like, there were so many people who were safe for him to open up to, but he never felt worthy, I think, of their love. And I think with the adoption, like, his big worry is that people would figure out what he really is and they would abandon him. And this is something I really do see every single day with clients. And it's the part that really sucks about sexual abuse specifically is that the word that a lot of my clients have used is impure. They feel like they're the person with the big secret. They're the person with the shame that should hide things. And especially, you come up in a certain culture that prioritizes like purity. They feel like they're the person who should be ashamed. And it's really difficult. Like, I'll spend years with clients trying to support them, and they know on a rational level, like, it's not their fault. They did nothing wrong. But there is this deep-seated belief that something is wrong with them. And I feel like that was the thing with Jude, is that there was this constant fear of being exposed for his past, even though that past had nothing to do with his decisions. Things happened to him and he had to do things to survive. Let's see. Colleen says, JB to me was the life of the party, the funny one. He also documents their friendship in his art. That's true. But even that ended up being invasive. It's like the one good thing you have to offer this group, you can't even do that without being problematic. Gloria said, I didn't like JB, but his paintings seemed really insightful, at least how the author described them. I truly loved how this author, you can even see in the acknowledgments, she really worked with people who were in all of these fields so that she could use the language and really paint an experience of what it's like to be a painter, what it's like to witness a work of art, what it's like to work in architecture, what it's like to, what sort of things as a child do you pay attention to when you're pursuing that line of work. I thought that that was a beautiful element of the character development in this story, is that I really felt like I was in New York experiencing these things with them. BG says, yes, it happened to my friend in that group. Our other friends made fun of a physical disability she has in front of other people. Ooh. Yeah, for me, if I saw something like that, like it sounds like you guys did the same, Gloria. I just could not, I don't think I could ever move forward from that. Especially, if we're supposed to be friends. So I could understand why Willem had a much more difficult time forgiving JB. Okay, another quote from Monica, Willem to Jude about never dating anyone. I worry sometimes that you have tried to convince yourself that you're somehow unattractive or unlovable, or that you've decided that certain experiences are off limits for you, but they're not, Jude. Anyone would be lucky to be with you. And Harold said something similar, like Harold told him, you are the most beautiful person I know. And Jude just couldn't hear that. He couldn't believe that. So it really, they stuck with him out of loyalty, definitely. JB, I don't know. I think in college he really brought them all together. And yeah, like Colleen said, the life of the party, and then it was loyalty. And honestly, you guys, for me, the lesson in that, and I actually work with a lot of my clients on this as well, sometimes loyalty is not enough. Sometimes we have to recognize that just because we've known a person a long time does not mean they're a good person for us. And even if they're a good person, that still does not mean they're a good person for us. I've had clients who go into business with friends from elementary school just because they love them, and the friend betrays them. Just sometimes, the signs are there, but we don't want to pay attention to them when this person has represented a certain stability and security for us, especially for those of us who have experienced broken homes. And your friendships were the things that persisted even when your family structure didn't. I find my clients in that position to have the most difficult time with letting go of friends they've had for a long time. Monica said, I think at one point, one of them says, I know I have worth because I am a good friend. So it might have felt like abandoning that value to ditch JB. That person was actually Willem. And that was, I think they were, it was a flashback to when they were younger. But yeah, Willem, ultimately, I think he did give JB the hardest time. And I really appreciated that somebody was like, because like Malcolm was like, I'm sorry, I'm still hanging out with him. And of course, Jude is like, no, you should still hang out with him. But I was like, somebody had to be the person to be like, that was so wrong. And you need to deal with yourself. You need to work on yourself before you can be in a relationship with me. And to me, in the end, when JB kisses Jude because he looked sad after Willem passed, that just showed me all of this, and you still don't know how to recognize or respect a person's boundaries. Like, it's still all about you at the end of the day, and JB just, yeah. I loved Andy, obviously loved Willem. Richard, love Richard. Harold, love Harold. Malcolm was okay, but JB was the worst to me. Okay, so we're gonna okay, and then from part 5. Yeah, that one about catapulting the past and catapulting or like letting his past overtake what's happening now. And that's exactly how trauma works. I totally agree with you, Monica. Ooh, yeah, this is a great one. How fast, how distressingly fast had their instinct for fear been awakened, as though fear itself were a virus that lay dormant that they would never be able to permanently dispel. Joyfulness, abandon, they had to relearn those. They had to re-earn them, but they would never have to relearn fear. It would live within the three of them, a shared disease, a shimmery strand that had woven itself between their DNA. This is the writing for me that gives it a 5. Okay, so I think I have one more section I made notes on. I think. Okay, yeah. All right. So I said, this is the part that made me cry. The loss of William was so unexpected. I love the end where Jude behaves in a way that presents as an opportunity for Harold and Julia to show him unconditional love. He finally experiences the joy of having parents. Jasbella says, I've been crying throughout this whole book, but when Willem died, I was crying like a baby. I called one of my friends for emotional support just to talk to her about my feelings. I did the same to my husband, y'all. I made him listen to so much of this book and he's like so lost, but I'm like, I have to talk to somebody about this. And then Monica has the quote about, so there's a moment where after Willem dies, Jude tries to starve himself to death because he felt like he made a promise to Harold that he wouldn't kill himself. So he said he's going to starve himself. And basically they do an intervention, put him on a feeding tube, force him to eat, he has to be watched while he eats. And so during one of these moments, he's at Harold and Julia's, his adoptive parents, and he doesn't want to eat and he's just feeling very angry and frustrated. And he decides he didn't have the willpower to try to be someone else anymore. So he just showed them who he really is. They brought him some food. He said, I don't want it. It looks nasty. He's trying to hurt their feelings. And then so Julia said, that's okay. I'll make you something else. So she brings him a grilled cheese and he grabs the plate and smashes up against the wall. At this point, he's like 51 years old. And this is the quote, because he at this point is expecting Harold to come and punch him because he's like, I've finally shown you the ugliest parts of myself and I want to see what you're going to do with that. And he expects that Harold's going to punch him. But Harold comes and Julia comes and they hug him. And they're like, I'm so sorry. And this quote right here, I love this. I love this. And he cries and cries for everything he has been, for everything he might have been, for every old hurt, for every old happiness, cries for the shame and joy of finally getting to be a child with all of the child's whims and wants and insecurities, for the privilege of behaving badly and being forgiven, for the luxury of tenderness, of fondness, of being served a meal and being made to eat it, for the ability at last, of believing a parent's reassurances, of believing that to someone he is special, despite all his mistakes and hatefulness, because of all his mistakes and hatefulness. I got choked up reading that. That right there. Ugh. To me, that is our happy ever after. You know? That moment of a lost little boy who finally, through all the shame he carries, experienced what it was like to have unconditional love from parents, even at 51. That for me is the happy ending. Now, in the end, as I said, trigger warning again, we're going to be talking about, I don't know, I guess SI. But he does end up killing himself 3 years after Willem died. But I still think he got to experience that unconditional love that he never thought he would have experienced from Willem, from Andy, from Julia, from Harold. And I think, obviously it brings the question up of like having agency over your own body. There was one part I haven't been pulling up my own quotes, but there was one part where he was talking about cutting himself and how because of his sexual trauma and physical abuse that people were always telling him what he could do with his body, what he should do with his body, and this felt like the only control he had over his body, something no one could take from him. And I think through an extension, I actually had a client tell me that today, that part of their logic behind their suicidality is that the idea of not having control over how they die, that's what gives them anxiety. And disclaimer, putting that out, if you are in that headspace, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to get some mental health support. I'm not advocating for hurting yourself, harming anyone else. This is just what's happening in the story, but I do want you to get support if that is where you're at. And there are resources. Actually, babe, could you put the National Suicide Hotline in the chat? But let me read what some of you guys are saying. Okay. Lauren said, this book destroyed me, and the further away I got from it, the more I started to dislike it. I completely agree with the trauma comments. Criticism does a fantastic analysis on it. Oh, I'll definitely watch that. Thank you for the recommendation, Lauren. BG said, Jude trying to starve himself to see Willem reminded me of Bella trying to do dangerous stuff to see Edward. Yes, yes. Great parallel there. And it also reminded me of clients I have that have hallucinations. And for a lot of them, it's not no one specific that they actually know, but there are, characters or beings that they create in their mind. So when we have a conversation about them taking medication for getting rid of their hallucinations, like a majority of them, they want to get rid of because they're telling them they're worthless, they're telling them to hurt themselves. But there might be one or two that are the protective ones that are kind. And part of why they won't take medication or they're resistant is because they don't want to lose those voices that feel like friends. So sometimes there can definitely be an attachment developed with the hallucination. I've seen it happen with multiple clients. And they would even be willing to deal with the stress of the bad voices for the couple of good voices. Maisie has a quote, vulnerability is the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness. But it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. Absolutely. Another quote in here was about how people are the source of trauma, but also your source of joy. So it's like, you can't cut everyone out. You can't just cut yourself away from people because they're the danger. Because in a lot of ways, that is also you basically preventing yourself from ever experiencing joy or pleasure. Gloria said, Richard saying, I know this isn't going to help, but I love you too, broke me. I felt for Jude by the end of the book as well. Yes. Monica says, not gonna lie, I would have been happy if the book ended there. Like if it was ambiguous that Jude commits suicide, but we had that moment. I would have been happier with the book as a whole. You know what? You are so right, Monica. You are so right. I completely agree with that. I believe that if they would have ended there, I would have loved it. What I understand about how she ended it, though, is that sometimes we do get too comfortable with happy endings. And that is not always the case. And some people can't be saved. Now as we're talking about it, I kind of think this book is more of a love letter to the friends. Ooh. Yeah, this is just hitting me. For the people who loved someone who ended up taking their life, it's not because you didn't love them enough. It's not because you couldn't give them everything they needed. Most of the time there are demons they're battling with that you just cannot control. And I think that maybe this book is about love and friendship, but it's also about the hardships of life and how, even if you try your best, even if you love someone completely selflessly, you still can't control their fate. And so when I think of it from that perspective, I do think that there is some value in that, ending it that way. But I do still think that the way the trauma is told, I think it's too much unless it's based on a real story. Unless this author can say that they just were writing a story based on someone they know who went through all of this. I think that she piled it on. Okay, so those are oh, okay, Mike, you with me on that? Yeah, it just came to me now, but I think that that's why we ended with Harold's perspective, right? Instead of Jude's, because Harold is probably the one who really thought he was going to save him. Willem thought he was going to save him, but then sometimes we die. Willem wasn't able to finish that out, and it probably wasn't even possible. And so, I really want to see. I don't know if you guys have seen any good interviews with the author, but I would love to see what her thoughts are on why the story was told. Clearly, it resonates with a lot of people. It leaves an impression. We're still talking about it 10 years later. So it is clearly leaving a big impression, but I kind of want to know what was her original intent when she was writing it. Okay, you guys. So we are at the end. The next book that we're going to read, I saw this book that I thought would be good for us. It's called, let me double check, because I created a new thing on my Goodreads so I can keep. Yeah. Okay, so we can do a poll. We could do a poll. Huh? Yeah, you can. We can do a poll. These are the two books that I'm between. The Upside of Stress, Why Stress is Good for You and How to Get Good at It. And Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. And why not? We can throw this other one in here too. This one is a little bit newer. Actually, yeah, this one, we can, these are the three books that we'll vote on. Because I'm ready to move into like some self-improvement stuff because this was an intense read. Are you putting the poll together?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I will read the synopsis of each of these so we can vote on what we want to read next. Okay, we'll start with the book you... The Upside of Stress, The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read, and Platonic. So you could just do those. You don't have to put the whole title. The Upside of Stress, The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read, and Platonic. Okay, and if any of you guys have read any of these, let me know your thoughts. This book... Oops. Okay, so this one is only 240 pages. So we're also looking at some books a little bit shorter. This book is about how we have relationships with our children, what gets in the way of a good connection, and what we can enhance it. The most influential relationships are between parents and children, yet for so many families, these relationships can go wrong, and it may be difficult to get back on track. In the book you wish your parents had read, and your children will be glad that you did, renowned psychotherapist Philippa Perry shows how strong and loving bonds are made with your children and how such attachments give a better chance of good mental health in childhood and beyond. She'll help you to understand how your own upbringing may be impacting upon your parenting style. Contain, express, accept, and validate your own and your child's feelings. Understand that all behavior is communication. Break negative cycles and patterns. Accept that you will make mistakes and what to do about them. So that's the first one that we'll be voting on. Oh, how do I go back? I can't see. Okay. There we go. Oops. I totally exited out. Sorry about that, you guys. You can see what I'm reading for fun. I gotta add it back? What does that mean?
Basically.
Here, let's go back to just chatting. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. I clicked the wrong thing. A lot of you are already saying the upside of stress. Okay. Great. Thank you. See, I can't see back up here. So, yeah. Okay. So let me go back to my book club possible shelf. Okay. So this time I'm just going to open a new tab. Okay, then the next one is the upside of stress. This one is even more like obscure. You can always tell by how many reviews a book has. The author of The Willpower Instinct delivers a controversial and groundbreaking new book that overturns long-held beliefs about stress. Somebody recommended this to me, and I was like, ooh, that actually sounds like a good one for the book club. He said more than 44% of Americans admit to losing sleep over stress, and while most of us do everything we can to reduce it, Stanford psychologist and best-selling author Kelly McGonigal, PhD, delivers a startling message. Stress isn't bad. In The Upside of Stress, McGonigal highlights new research indicating that stress can, in fact, make us stronger, smarter, and happier if we learn how to embrace it. So that is a book that was recommended to me. And then our last option is about friendships. Because a lot of people have said, we kind of focus a lot on romantic relationships in the book club. So I thought it might be good to have something focused on friendships. A lively, data-driven guide to finding your people from psychologist Dr. Marissa G. Franco about the sometimes surprising science behind making friends, maintaining them, and building connections of all sorts in an era of social fragmentation and rampant loneliness. Loneliness is an epidemic in part due to a culture that prioritizes romance at the expense of all other relationships. But in fact, science shows that platonic relationships are a crucial, possibly the crucial key to shaping who we are and how we can become our happiest, most fulfilled selves. So, how do we nurture meaningful relationships in an era of distraction, burnout, and chaos? Just as economist Emily Oyster breaks down the science of child rearing by countering fables with facts, psychologist and professor Marissa G. Franco unpacks the latest, often counterintuitive findings about friendship. For example, why your friends aren't texting you back. It's not because they hate you, and the myth of just showing up. You need to bring more than your mere presence to the table to make real friends. Forging lasting bonds with other people isn't rocket science, but it does take work, and there are research-based ways to improve the number and quality of your connections. The good news, the benefits can be massive to not just our sense of well-being, but also our physical health. Okay, so right now the upside of stress is winning. I'll give it another couple of minutes. To see which one. So the upside of stress is winning. How do I just click to see all of them? Can I just click on the poll? Oh yeah, I see. Oh, actually platonic and the upside of stress are tied. Ooh, y'all making it hard. Somebody's got to break the tie. We're 40-40 right now. Somebody has to break the tie. If we can't break the tie in here, I may take the poll to Goodreads. Oh, did you do it? Oh, somebody else did? Okay. All right. So now Platonic is winning. Okay, so it looks like we will be reading Platonic for our next meeting. Let's see, how many pages is Platonic? Okay, 336 pages. All right. So this is one that we'll read. And now let's pick our date for our next meeting. Yes. Okay, so of course we do this every other month, but I don't want us to get into the holidays. So we will do our meeting on December 17th, Tuesday, December 17th, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. I'm going to go ahead and save that in my calendar. Okay. We're locked in, you guys. This will be our book, Platonic: How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. I did some videos recently on friendship. Actually, just like I said, I just came from the TED conference, and another speaker did a talk about, a couple of speakers actually did a talk about friendships. And so I'm actually looking forward to diving in and enhancing my relationships. Thank you guys so much for contributing. I know this book was a heavy one. I really needed to have you guys so I can make it through this read. And I'm happy that I did. I'm happy that I read the book, but it's definitely something I will never read again. Okay, you guys, so thank you so much for joining the live. I appreciate you. And I will see you in the next one. And for anybody who's wondering when the next Love is Blind video is out, we should have a video out this week. We'll be getting Hannah and Nick out hopefully tomorrow, but we've been super busy. See you soon. Bye.